Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the um, triangle that I use in my sex magic practice to create alchemy and balance in my life. This triangle is something that I have taken inspiration from, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I also kind of just made it up so I could process my own journey and process my own emotions and archetypical energy. And I say that to say, when I'm sharing stuff like this, I know that it can really feel like teaching, but the way that I approach magic and spirituality and sexuality and all of these really beautiful journeys that I'm on is that everyone has their own individual practice that they are creating by their will, that they are creating by their actions, and that they are creating by their service and where they put their energy. So while it may be that this triangle does really serve you, and that you do happen to be able to use it to kind of process some of the experiences in your life, there's also an immense amount of information and energies and processes that you are going to be creating and exploring. And I hope that this inspires you to do that. So, um, so let's get into it. I think a lot and practice a lot from a place of sacred sexuality and understanding my place in the cosmic order. I think that energy is something that it takes a little practice to perceive. And then once I became a little more well practiced in perceiving energy, I realized why I was so drawn to sex magic and why I was so drawn to sacred sexuality. And a lot of my story in my life is about healing wounds in my lineage around sex and sexuality. So, as we move forward, I will say content warning because I will be talking about things like consent, violence against women, toxic masculinity, the patriarchy. So, if any of that gave you kind of some feelings and you're feeling that you don't really resonate with this and you'd like to remove yourself, that's the content warning for you. This is deep work. It really is not the kind of thing that you can, put on while you're cleaning the house and then magically the next day you understand your purpose here on earth as a sacred sexual energetic being, right? The deep understanding of your being and your relationship to sexuality comes first with your ability to understand what your place in those energies are, right? So for those of us that have been on the side where we're experiencing violence or we're experiencing things being projected onto us, we can sometimes become really stimulated about reliving this victimhood or reliving this place and reliving that moment. And what spirit and the universe, what source really desires in my practice um, is for us to find spaces within ourself and within our life where we can release, not ignore, not pretend that it doesn't exist, um, but release our grip on the story and invite alchemy and invite blessings and invite change. Because when bad things happen to us, we have a human reaction. When we are traumatized, we live from that trauma until we learn to process and transmute it, which therapy is a huge help in. Getting help around that stuff is a huge help. I know far too many people that have been a victim of sexual violence in their life. And while spirituality is a huge part of the answer, there's also a wealth of amazing psychological and therapeutic information and support that exists in the world so that we can use it. And I'm seeing now, there was a time when, interesting, psychology and psychologists were actually the enemy. And that was on purpose. Though many of those energies have moved over to like marketing and advertising, but those energies, I'm like getting a lot of messages. But like things like Freud, which I am going to talk about later, and those masculine energies around perception and yeah, the point being, though we did a lot of work in the 70s as a collective to heal some of those things. And through the 80s and 90s, we moved through a period of psychological and therapeutic shadow work, which those of you that are interested in psychology and therapy and all of the data and information that we have around that stuff, you might notice that, especially when it comes to things like consent and womanhood and autonomy and homosexuality, the gender spectrum, like we worked through a lot of stuff. And in some ways, we are still processing that as a culture and as a society. But I'm very blessed to see a new generation of therapy being awakened by those prayers that we had during that shadow period, by those people that were able to maintain their spirituality and maintain their compass and maintain their relationship with God through generations and generations and generations and generations of torture, at the hands of people that were claiming to be mental health experts, right? Which has a lot to do with academia and how fucked up that system is, but we don't have time for all that. Anyway, that was kind of a tangent. The point being, I understand that sometimes it can feel like the enemy, but my prayer is that if you are experiencing the ripples and repercussions and echoes of not only your trauma, but the trauma in your lineage, that you can find a safe place to get grounded help for that. Help that is grounded and integrated into this world. And in addition to that help, we also have a lot of help in the spirit world. We have a lot of angels and energies that are guiding us to a more holistic view of psychology and a more holistic view of what personal identity really is. The funny thing about the way that humans study the world is that we pull everything apart and examine the individual pieces of it. So when we take philosophy and psychology and we like pull them apart, they're both weaker. And then when we take, there's an additional piece that's in there, which is like spirituality and connection to the earth, connection to ourselves. All of these things really exist in a double helix DNA gravitational way. And when we are pulling them apart in our human experience to examine them, they lose a lot of their value and they lose a lot of their support of each other. So you are invited as a seeker and as who are you? As whoever you are, who's here studying magic and trying to learn about this shit, and someone who has a pure heart and a pure will, your invitation is to take those pieces of all of those things that are scattered everywhere and put them together in a way that serves you, because you have the universe inside of you. So when you're pulling things in, you have the double helix energy that is helping you make sense of it. And by rejecting anything, you are, creating a system that can't really flow into its gravity, right? So the rejection of these energies is really a rejection of the flow and a rejection of your ability to integrate and experience it, when really you're here to experience it. You are here to pull those things into your gravity so that you can get what you need from it and spit it out, right? Spit out all of the excrement, which, goes into its own waste cycle. So that was a little bit of a tangent. Thank you, God. Thank you, Spirit. We are so blessed. So I guess I'll just move right into the psychology part. So When I am experiencing things in my life that are difficult for me, I feel really called to teach about them and to like put it in the world, share my experience. And that's how, verbally processing things and channeling this way is very helpful for my spiritual practice. It's a beautiful bird outside. um Very helpful for my spiritual practice. Why was I saying that? Oh, but I also like to do a little research too. So I was going through, and my triangle is called the Virgin, the Whore, the Mother, which can be twisted. It can also be the Mother, the Whore, the Virgin, right? It switches around depending on what I'm exalting in any moment. But I realized when I was journaling about this and speaking about it with people close in my life that it sounded very reminiscent of what I have heard from the realm of psychology, which is the Madonna horror complex. And so we're just going to dig into that. So I look it up, the Madonna horror complex, which is Freudian in genealogy and in its origin. Sometimes I call things Freudian because I'm roasting them, because I find them to be patriarchal and weirdly repressive to sexuality. But in this case, it was actually Freud who coined this concept of a woman who is far too motherly to be found sexually attractive by her partner. I mean, I'm also polyamorous, and I think monogamy has created a lot of toxic situations for us. Being denied community, being denied sexual expression in our world, being denied the ability to live and breathe and move in the ways that we want to. Of course, it hits people with tits the hardest because we can't take our tops off here. But that's kind of just my grievance as someone from the American South that can't have a nipple out without being afraid of being assaulted. But in other news, looking through this information, I was like, surely I can find something that isn't directly Freudian that has to do with the Madonna horror complex that speaks to me so that I can have some information and some data that resonates with me and I can share it with my YouTube subscribers, right? And I'm scrolling through and I'm reading, and all of these things are talking about a man's perception of a woman. And none of them on the first 3 pages of Google had anything to do with the experience of the woman who is undergoing this objectification. So, fuck sources. Like, I'm a Virgo. I have all this Capricorn in my big planets. Like, I would love if everything I said had a little footnote and a source next to it so that people could go back and check my work. But honestly, academia is toxic and capitalism has ruined any chance that we have at creating pure information about the things that we're experiencing. So that whole experience for me was very enlightening and triggering. So I'm scrolling through and I'm reading about these men's experience, and I do believe that there is a lot to acknowledge around the way that men and boys get confused about sexuality. And as a conspiracy theorist, I believe a lot of that confusion is intentional. I think that a lot of the pornography that we're exposed to, and also content warning, because I would like to mention that we are also in the throes of a sex trafficking industry that none of these porn platforms are free from exploiting the secrecy of, honestly. All of this, all of these things really support a system of blackmail that has existed for years and years and years. It also supports a lot of black magic and Saturnian magic and pedophilia. So I'll say all that so that I can kind of let some of these people off the hook. They really did create information from the society that they were within. And in some ways, and many ways, we are still under the thumb of that society. So it's not necessarily that men and boys are the enemy, But the way that men and boys are targeted and manipulated into understanding sexuality in a way that hurts women, that, you know, that's a place that we can start to heal toxic masculinity. That's a place where we can look and understand that a man's a man's perception of a woman is not important or necessary, right? It's really about a person's perception of themselves. And if you want any more clarity or freedom about that, then consider renouncing the gender binary and prevent yourself from not only assigning gender to people, but also from treating them with gender and having gendered energy in how you treat people, because that's pretty fucked up. Um, okay, so we'll close out that part. Mm. Okay. So in my experience, I have some family history of women being oppressed by men, right? And I also have a little family history of very, very strong women overcoming the violence and oppression of men. And I think that what is important as a part of how I live my life is it has seemed like a priority of mine, um, even before I knew that this was my path, to really know and become close to my sense of sacred sexuality so that I could create space to have a very divine relationship with myself. And that's taken a long time. I think a lot of the really good work got done with me when I was undergoing puberty and I was experiencing all of these, desires. I was also like a very, early on, very young. I was so curious about sex and sexuality. And I felt really free to. I didn't have a lot of very scary, oppressive male energy in my childhood or in my life. And a blessing of being surrounded by a lot of strong women is kind of getting to see and feel the freedom of not being held to a standard of performing for men and being property of men. And of course, there's still the story in the South that is both explicit and implicit that there is some man that's going to come and marry us and then we're going to settle down and have kids, like, and then be a housewife. And that is the freedom, is being protected, and being nurtured by this magical man. But the unfortunate thing about that story is that in a world where women are trained to be rescued, people that have the means to do some rescuing then um, can permission themselves to get away with a lot of other evils, right? If our main standard as women is that we would like to have a roof over our head and babies running around the house, then those unspoken things that we desire and that we deserve can go unmet, especially when we don't have a voice and when we're trained to not have a voice around what we need and what we desire and our boundaries. So, a lot of this work that I do around sacred sexuality has to do with unlearning these patterns of heteronormativity, of mononormativity, of gender, of economic imbalance. I'll say classism, right? And it's such a multifaceted and rich place to do healing because in my world, and this may not be true for everyone, I'm just sharing about my practice. In my world, my sacred sexuality is connected to all of those things because in order to have a pure relationship with myself and to have a pure connection to source, I do have to renounce and release all of these promises that were made to me by a society that cannot and will not fulfill them. It's a very carrot and stick situation, that we are often told that our greatest freedom and our most desirable outcome is to live happily ever after with one person. And the wound that is created by that lie is a chasm that we cannot jump over. It really is only healed by God and by surrender and by a deep relationship with our higher self and our higher being. Um, I feel very stimulated about that. So I say all that to say this. I am a Virgo, and the zodiacal symbol in this Western astrology that we use is the Virgin. But in other cultures, it's the Mother. So when I was studying astronomy, I was realizing this, and that's when I started to use this triangle to process and transmute my experience as a sexually sovereign being. Some of it does require me to dip into how other people perceive and experience me, because in our human world, we have all of these people here so that we do have mirrors. They are mirroring us. So as I am acting out of these archetypes, whatever is getting reflected back to me during that time is a message for me. So I do involve perception in my practice. I don't totally ignore the fact that there is a male gaze and there is a community surrounding me perceiving my actions, right? And that the honoring of my perception, honoring the fact that my actions have an effect in the outside world, is how I prevent myself from taking off all of my clothes and running naked through a grocery store, right? Because honestly, if we all did that, we would have a much different perception of sexuality and nudity, probably a couple days after this flash mob attack of naked grocery store runners. But because that could traumatize people, because we have a system around nudity, that's not possible, right? So it is important to honor the perception of others as we do this sacred sexuality work. It can feel like, oh, if I'm sexually liberated, I must be having sex all the time, or taking my clothes off a lot, or I'm nude and free. But the unfortunate thing is, part of why we are doing this work in this reality is because nudity is not freedom, right? But safe nudity is. What we're doing in this age is learning consent and safety. And what that requires of us is processing the times in our life and in our lineage where consent and safety was not offered to us and was not available to us, right? Our DNA knows that that was true for a really long time. And now we're invited to make miracles so that we can release ourselves from that bondage and from that pattern. When I think about the virgin, the energy of a virgin is not unfucked or never had sex with. Virgin in the magical context means untainted by the jadedness of this world. Virgin means hasn't experienced a very close death yet. Virgin means hasn't experienced a very tough heartbreak, isn't jaded about relationships, and isn't jaded about the world. And so what I think is so interesting about the psychological obsession with the virgin energy, when the Freudian Virgin Madonna, which Madonna is Mother Mary, which is ironic in so many ways for my specific journey and maybe for yours. A lot of that had to do with this concept or this trope of a man no longer being attracted to their wife and then seeking a younger partner. And so when we think about virgin in that context, really what they are chasing is this sense of innocence, someone who hasn't been hurt yet, someone who has a lot of trust and is naive to the pains of this world. The unfortunate thing is, when people seek that out, it might be because they aren't a very trustworthy person. And so they would like someone who doesn't have a lot of experience to abuse, essentially. I myself, as an adolescent and as a young woman, was very taken advantage of during my virgin period. I mean, of course, I was very sexually active, but I was spiritually and emotionally a virgin in the archetypical way, in the way that I prefer, because sexual virginity does not exist, but the archetype of innocence 100% does. And for people that, for a society that tells us that older men and younger women are supposed to be together, or, if this pattern of adultery continues to be glorified in its unspoken liberation from marriage, then I think that essentially what I would like to say is there's a pattern of people using genuinely innocent energies to do harm and express all of those repressed, aggressive, and unfair grief energies, right? What I really wish I saw on the first 3 pages of Google.com, maybe next time I'll try DuckDuckGo. But what I really saw was that there wasn't a lot of consideration for the things that a man wishes to have a virgin for, right? We get told all of these stories about, what a virgin can offer sexually because we think that sexual virginity exists. But in reality, I think that there is a way that the masculine wishes to feel exalted and to feel brave and to be a provider. And when the masculine isn't offered that opportunity for, because, not all men want to do that, right? But for those masculine energies that really wish to show up in a positive way, the repression of that can lead to the shadow of it being played out, right? And it's very difficult for someone who is trying to play out those energies to do it with someone that they have a lot of agreements with. Like if you have a mortgage with someone and you try to come at them, controlling their behavior and trying to get them to see you in a certain way, like that rigidity exists because of the agreements and responsibilities that are required. And some of that is the trap of monogamy, honestly. I hope any of that made sense. I totally tuned out. But what I would love to hear more about is the experience of the person who is suffering so much that they are seeking out the blessings of that virginal energy because they feel that they cannot achieve it themselves. And the thing about all of these like archetypical energies is that when we go to seek it out in someone else, instead of seeking it out in ourselves, we cause harm to everyone that we're doing that to, including us. Like if I think that I am going to somehow find a relationship that will teach me or allow me to be a sovereign sexual lioness woman that I know that I am, if I'm looking for that in another person, I'm not going to find it. And often I will run my pattern or my algorithm, like I will run that loop at someone and it will create dissonance and sometimes harm, right? So don't cause harm. Moral of the story. And then, so that the virgin is the innocence, and then the mother is the caretaker, the nurturer, the get shit done person, right? And the intuitive master of healing. I want to name too, if I haven't said it yet, that all of these exist within all of us. So if you are a man, you have mother energy. If you do not subscribe to the gender binary, you have mother energy. It's in your natal chart, it's in your DNA, it's in your lineage, it's in your space, right? That energy, we call it mother and we associate mothers with women, but that's not how it is in the spirit world. That's not what it looks like. What it looks like is restoration, nourishment, caring for, warmth, cuddles, squirrels. Oh my God, listen to that squirrel. Okay, maybe you can't hear it. So when I was in a period in my life when I was trying to move into mother energy because it was like a time for that cycle. I cycle through these probably every year really, or sometimes every month. Like they come up, these energies come up where I am feeling this expression and feeling this, need and this desire to not necessarily like play the role of, but to step into the energy of, right? And that means my actions and my behaviors and my words are going to start flowing in that direction. And so if my lifestyle was not a mother's lifestyle, right? My lifestyle was, I was in entertainment. So I was going out and I was at bars, and there's a vacuum in the world for mother energy right now. Because of the patriarchy, that the mother energy has been constricted, and there's a lot of bondage around it. So I'm not going to brag, but I'm pretty magical. So I'm starting to move into my mother energy. No bondage, unrestricted, totally stepping into that archetype because I know that I'm ready and it's time. But if there are people out there with wounds around motherhood, those wounds get projected onto me. And then I find myself in caretaking patterns with adult men instead of small children. Right? So, no shade, no problem, right? I have mothered plenty of grown men, and I was happy to do it because that's what they needed at the time. It was a part of my journey, but it's definitely not my responsibility and not super recommended, right? We give away our energy when we don't allow people to find their own healing and instead provide healing for them in a situation that they didn't consent to be changed, right? This whole idea that we can change someone by giving them enough love, if we can change someone by nurturing them and healing them, that's not how it works. Unfortunately, it's actually pretty manipulative and non-consensual to try to change someone. And using mother energy to do that, I mean, when I was doing it, it didn't feel great. It felt pretty blasphemous, actually. And it felt kind of unbearable, and there were consequences. So I rolled right out of those and learned a lot from them on the way, a lot of pain and heartbreak. And then I realized that mother energy is sacred, and that there's this weird idea that I have that there's going to be some situation that this like power that I have is for. But in this place where I am, that I'm just learning who I am, and I'm just dipping into my power to see what flavors come up, right? There's not necessarily some kind of grand mission, right? Of course, I have a grand mission on earth, but the grand mission does not mean, going into people's lives and tinkering with their shit, right? The grand mission is listening to source and then living in a way that is going to create mass change. So, the universe gave me exactly what I needed in order to fully land and express my mother energy in a way that felt good and right for me. The thing that I noticed when I was working with my mother energy was that by doing it, by failing, trying again, trusting God, trusting myself, continuing to heal the wound, I was going deeper and deeper into my lineage and into my ancestors. This is right around the time I started talking to my great-grandmother. And for the women that come to me when I'm doing this work, they express that they would like to see the motherhood that they wished for lived out in me, and that I have the capacity and the willingness to do that. And so in order for me to feel as if, because the thing is, I don't have children, right? Yeah, I'm not going to go too much into it, but I don't have children. So the thing that is important for my story is to, before I get to any kind of point where I'm responsible for another human being's livelihood, to really understand what motherhood means to me, and to really understand why it is that I have the abilities that I have. A lot of my abilities have to do with motherhood and the virgin archetype as well, with my ability to transmute energy into innocence. And then comes the horror. So the horror archetype is the very sexually promiscuous, kind of mischievous and really beloved by everyone is kind of the deal. There are some ways that we sort of toxify someone who really enjoys sex, but in the base core reality of human experience, not necessarily of our culture that we're in, because the culture that we are in represses free and safe and happy sexuality. But in the, I guess I would say what I'm hearing is like in the spirit world, but what I'm seeing is that there is a spirit world here. So it's like the spirit world that's on earth where we connect on a conscious level, but not on a physical level. It's like this integrated in between where enjoying sex, being loved and being watched and being seen, all of those things are really accepted. That energy is erotic and charged and beautiful. And there are roles in our society that have fallen away, or kind of just been stamped. Like it's like they've taken all of these, individuated things about this archetype of this beautiful, expressive, um, charming, attractive, giving, and, sexually liberated person, like particularly woman. And they have, squished them all together into the horror, which includes things that it includes this energy of capitalistic oppression because of the trade, in when we think about like the definition of that, it's like the trade of money and sex, right? When really that we could replace money and sex with pentacle energy, which would mean like gifts, food, home life, like all of these really wholesome energies. That is the exchange for this great erotic icon who exists in society to charge, inspire, serve, and elevate others. It's a really positive energy that has a very unfortunate connotation because of the structure that we're in. So, I slept around a lot. I really did go through a phase where I was unsure why I was so obsessed with sex comparatively and so free in my sexuality and really kind of confused, about the way that it felt for me and the way that it was perceived by others. And as I got older, I started to realize some of those restrictions. I made some really bad choices around that kind of stuff because, um, it really did feel like I had an indignant sense of how the world was supposed to be. And me being unsafe to express myself felt, that felt like my greatest battle. It really felt like my greatest battle in life to create a world where I could be safe expressing myself the way that I felt, which is as a divine sexual lioness being. But I made a whole show about it called Sell Your Body Show, and I fought the battle. I did. Through that experience, I found a lot of really amazing and useful information, about myself and about society. I, went down a lot of really beautiful rabbit holes around exploitation and economics. I found out how to really honor, sex workers in our culture. And I also found how to, lean into and understand the, individuated, multifaceted aspects of people that enjoy sex and how they deserve to be treated and seen in our world and in society. So I'm blessed by that experience. I don't think and what's so interesting is, I will talk about how I use the triangle, I promise. But, I'm kind of going through a little bit of a transition right now where I went on a sex fast. I've been practicing celibacy. I was having spiritual experiences where, and this was like a few months ago, or whatever, whenever. the thing that was happening was I was hearing spirit, I was channeling messages, and I was hearing the message, don't have sex with this person, don't have sex with this person, don't have sex with this person. And then my body would tell me the opposite, and so I would. And after I did that 3 times, my life changed so that I would no longer have access to those people. Thank you, coronavirus, right? And then I started to sit with, the ways that I had given away my sexual energy because I knew it was endless and because I knew what my power was. And what I'm being invited to do now in my sexual journey is to learn how to use my sexual energy for me. And it's really difficult for someone, or it was difficult for me to be like masturbating with the moon every new and full moon, doing all of these amazing, beautiful spells where I was having visions and contacting my ancestors and experiencing heightened states of not psychological, psychedelic. I mean, yeah, a little psychological, psychologically, psychedelic experiences through this practice. And it's like, is this the same body that I'm using to heal the wounds of these, alcoholic, irresponsible, whatever. I'm not going to insult them, but the point being, so I had a little bit of a wake-up call, and I've been working with that energy and trying to feel into how to understand what it is like to move through that arc and come out the other side with God's love and light, right? So when I use the triangle, let me draw it so that I can show you. Well, I flip it. I can't really draw it because it's in my head. Okay, I'm just going to tell you and hope that it makes sense. Please, Spirit. So the triangle exists, and the 2 pieces of the triangle that are at the bottom are the things that are influencing my stability, and then the thing at the top is what's propelling me forward, right? So when I have the triangle here, what's happening now is at the point of the triangle, I have the mother, and then at the base, I have the whore and the virgin, right? So I am influencing my move forward with my past, essentially, which is those 2, and then I come at reality with my mother energy. And then, sometimes I'm in situations where it's really requiring me to come at it with love and innocence. So, I'll just give an example. There are times when I really want to protect children. I really want to protect, like when I was working at a school with those little kids, like I have some major protective mother energy. And if I come at someone, especially because I don't have any biological children, like if I come at, other teachers or parents or even just society, if I come at it with that angry protector, I know I'm not going to get the right outcome because I'm psychic. So I turn the triangle and I turn to virgin, and then I'm supported by my whore and my mother, and the virgin can move forward in my energy to come at it with innocence and to come at it with playful grace and a sense of humility and desire to that's the other thing about the virgin, is that the virgin really wants love, like really not wants in a needy, like unhealthy way, but like is like, yes, like let's love each other. I would like, true love, teenage romance kind of vibes, right? Up till 3 a.m. with our earbuds in each other's ears, like a very sweet love. And so even if I'm in a setting where I have had to be this provider and be this leader and be this mother, I can easily alchemize a new reaction and a new way of being by pulling on those archetypal energies that were given to me by our DNA lineage, right? And then, of course, there's situations where I need to kind of come at it in a very sexy way. The thing about the horror, if I have the horror at the front, and I use that word, but I realize it's probably maybe triggering for y'all. For me, like, as someone who has experienced the archetype in its most physically manifested form, if you know what I mean, I don't have any problem saying that word, but I understand, like, you might be struggling to understand why I love horror energy so much, and I can understand how that can be confusing. But if I'm leading with my horror, it's not just leading with sexuality and a sense of sacred expression. It's also of service. The horror wants everyone to feel good and to get what they need and to be sovereign and to be themselves. That's the other thing about the horror, is that they don't really belong to anyone. They are in service of raising the pleasure vibration and performing in a way that helps everyone feel safe in their sexual sovereignty, despite any previous circumstances or relationships or hierarchies or wounds, right? So when I'm using horror energy, it's not necessarily just about showing up with cleavage and being super sexy. It's also kind of like a, how can I help create more pleasure and more safety and more sexual sovereignty here? Like, what is it that I can do with my body and my gifts to help the energy in this space, or help this circumstance be transmuted into one that's in service of all of us, and so we can co-create that reality, right? Because that's what sex is. That's what all of this sexual energy and sex magic is about. It's about kind of this meta level of co-creation, where we're not just co-creating with spirit, we're also co-creating with one another to manifest. Okay. Well, I feel like I kind of did everything that I wanted to do. Just gonna check in. Yeah. So really what I want to leave you on is to release your fear of being a multifaceted person. Release your fear of needing to perform or look a certain way. I know that I get, because I post very scandalous things online, right? I'm very expressive in my divine femininity and my sexual sovereignty. So I do, I hear a lot like, oh, well, if I posted photos like that, my family would never forgive me, blah, blah, blah. And I know that that's true. I know that that's true. It's triggering. We are such a sexually suppressed society that the relationship between each other is squeezed and restricted, so that when we see other people being sexual, we immediately, or a lot of us immediately, become triggered about how dangerous that is. Because it is kind of dangerous. It is really radical and it is really revolutionary. And my invitation is, if you want to step into the expressive piece, if you want to be expressive in that way, you may have to release some fear and cultivate some bravery in order to set healthy boundaries. Boundaries also exist within. It's not really everybody's job to see your cleavage or your butt and immediately think about you getting fucked. That's a boundary in their mind that probably exists because of the media that we have consumed their entire life. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the final piece that is feeling like it needs to be expressed. Yep, that's it. All right, I'm sending lots of love.